Being a postdoc is really difficult. It often feels like you are overworked and undervalued. Let's talk about it. Last time we talked about careers, and I got some really nice messages from people, so thank you for that. It seemed to really resonate. There was a news piece in Nature a few years ago now, talking about the paucity of postdocs, and this is talking about how postdocs are leaving and trying to get at why postdocs are leaving academia. It's not just postdocs, right? It's kind of everyone is leaving academia at the moment. And I was quoting that article, and I can't remember what I said, but it's something around one of the reasons people are leaving is because they don't feel valued as a postdoc. And that's really what I want to focus on today, because value means a lot of different things. It means different things to different people. But I think being a postdoc in particular fails every meaning of being valued. It's a very strange job because they are so temporary and transient. Postdocs are often, in the UK at least, they're only sort of 3 years, maybe 5, and then you have to move on unless you're lucky enough to stay in the same lab. So when we're talking about this, there isn't really a single answer to what value is. There also isn't an answer as to whether you should be in academia or not. Last time I was talking about my experience so that people could see the path I took and hopefully know that they're not alone in struggling with things. But also some of the good bits. Not everything was bad. But some people should be in academia, should stay in academia. Some people should leave academia to go work in industry. Some people should go into psychom. Some people could go and do something entirely different. It's very individual. And I'm, just as last time, I'm talking in an independent capacity. I'm not talking about necessarily any specific experiences or any particular employers I've ever had. I have to say that because talking about this stuff gets me into trouble. And I'm also talking about things in an expert capacity based on conversations I've had with a lot of people. So these are sort of a bunch of different value-based elements I just want to sort of run through. One of the first things people associate with value is salary. And this is really easy when we talk about academia because until you get to the higher levels, I think everyone agrees that everyone is underpaid. Academia is not a single job, regardless of which role you have. Even PhD students are doing multiple sort of full-time jobs. Postdocs do even more. And then when you start running your own lab, you're essentially, for the first few years at least, a postdoc doing all the extra jobs you're doing as a postdoc, and now running a business and doing all the extra things that come with being a PI. And so, 7+ jobs in one easily. And that's not reflected in the salary at any point. But postdocs in particular seem to be really, really underpaid, given the incredible amount of education needed, of skills needed. A really good postdoc will often have a mix of skills that basically no one else in the world has. And they're not paid as if that's the case. They're paid as if they're incredibly replaceable. And often now with salary, it also hits differently depending on where you live. People in the US very much experience that. If you live in San Francisco or Boston, it's quite expensive. San Francisco is very expensive. In the UK, that's also true. If you live in, we call it the Golden Triangle of London, Oxford and Cambridge. If you live in one of those places, it's very, very expensive. A postdoc wage isn't really very good there. Now, if you live in the north in the UK, a postdoc wage is actually quite good. You do get paid a little bit less because you're not in those expensive areas, but it's not a huge difference. Certainly the more money you get, being in somewhere like London doesn't really make any difference whatsoever, as someone who's lived in London for quite a while. Within those areas where it is high living costs, the postdoc wage doesn't go very far. And remember, this is a salary where you've spent about 8 years in education, and that's time that you're not paying into a pension. You're not earning a real wage, and in many ways you are delaying sort of the big life stages. And entry-level jobs from undergraduate can pay not that much less than a starting postdoc salary. The difference is postdoc salaries go up every year and they do reach a cap, whereas someone who's just done an undergraduate degree, yes, they might start at a lower salary, but they've got much more potential to just shoot up the salary scale because they get bonuses depending on what career they're in. You get rewarded for doing good work financially. You don't get that in academia. But so you've got this mix of not only this low pay, but also relatively low pay, but also this not paying into the future aspect. And that often feels like it's left out of discussions when people are talking about salaries, certainly comparing academia and other places. And I just find it very, very interesting that society values science so little that there's no real incentive to spend more money on sciences and technology, especially after things like the pandemic, where science got us out of the pandemic. Science was the way out, and yet still there's been no real big investment. And that's ultimately why salaries are relatively low. That, and everyone in science does it because they're passionate, right? And so it's easy to recruit anyone who will do the job. Which actually, it's another part of the salary and the value side of things. It's immensely competitive, which is weird because normally if something is immensely competitive, there's a huge prestige attached to it, or there's a huge salary attached to it. And that's not the case with academia. I don't know if that's because academia is very global compared to a lot of careers, or if it's just the fact that it relies on passion so much. In academia, we're competing for a promotion, we're competing to move up the career stage, or in many cases, to have a job and keep the job we have. We're not competing to do the best bit of work. We're not competing to do the most rigorous science possible. And that's not what academia should be. Academia is meant to be collaborative and moving science forward, moving society forward. And yet instead we spend so much time competing with each other. Value also comes in the form of recognition and reward. It doesn't have to be financial. But I think this is one area where academia really, really fails. Academics and academia views papers, first author papers, as a suitable reward. And yet papers are also the things used to judge us, which makes them a very, very twisted reward. Publishing a paper is not a reward. It's part of the job. It's probably the essential part of being a scientist. And yet that is often viewed as the reward part as well. And those two things really need to be pulled apart desperately. A reward is something like a pay increase because you've done particularly good work. And this shouldn't be paper-based good work. This should be non-paper-based as well. So, maybe you've contributed to the reputation of your department. You've done some amazing science communication or advocacy work, or you're an amazing teacher. They should be rewarded, not just, you published this paper and you managed to get it in a cell Nature Science. But reward could also just be verbal recognition. That goes a long way as well. It's not as good as financial reward, but there's not enough of that in academia either. And I don't mean from your PI or from your immediate line manager. I mean publicly in front of people. We really should be celebrating the people in academia a lot more than we currently do. And when I was a PhD student in the final year, the department, created this new award called the Ian Peake Award. And it was an award for doing something that contributed positively to the department's reputation. And I thought it was a really, really nice thing to see because it was a way of rewarding people who were doing stuff that wasn't just being in the lab constantly and producing a paper. It was rewarding people who were good colleagues and really put the effort into making the environment a nice place to work, into creating and designing things that helped other people. And these are the things we should really be wanting in the people we're recruiting to departments. If you work with somebody, you want to work with people like that, not necessarily people who are producing cell Nature Science papers. And I would love to see more of those kind of things spread out across academia. It's not a hard thing to do. I think that one came with like £200 financial thing with it, but you don't need that. You just need the award itself is kind of good enough. And the fact that you can celebrate that across the whole department. The reason it needs to go beyond papers is, I would hope is obvious, but a lot of the tasks that go outside of papers in academia, they're not done by men. They're primarily done by women and minority groups. There's a really good study, 2024, I think, where they surveyed a bunch of people, and it's not an amazing study scientifically necessarily, because there's quite a lot of limits to it. But the amazing thing was that they got quotes from the people they were interviewing, and a lot of the men were just very, very upfront about how they do jobs deliberately badly so that nobody asks them to do them. They actively avoid doing things that don't lead to producing a paper because those things don't count. And that's why it's left to these other people to do them. And yet, if those people stopped doing those jobs, academia would grind to a halt. So we really do need to reward more than just the paper. Awards are a starting point. This sort of careerism that we see in academia, you see everywhere. But I always think careerism is the ruin of science, because careerism is buying into publish or perish. It is buying into avoiding doing anything that makes you a good colleague in order to get ahead. It is bullying the people who work for you and forcing them to work long hours because that benefits your career. And I think we need to move away from that. And while we're talking about rewards and recognition, that also ties in with feeling respected in your role, and that, if you feel respected, you feel valued. There was a really good article someone wrote for, I think it was the eLife magazine a few years ago. It was a postdoc who wrote this, and they'd been a postdoc for a very long time. They didn't want to run a lab. They didn't want to become a PI. They were very happy being a postdoc. But the thing I took away from that article was right near the end, they were writing about how when they go to conferences, people come up to them and talk to them, and they're surprised to hear that they're not a PI, and they felt like they got less respect because they weren't a PI, because there was this long-term postdoc. And that's absolutely true. Postdocs get distinctly less respect than a PI, even though they might not be any less experienced. And it's almost as if that step of acquiring a fellowship or a lectureship conveys that you are an expert, questioning what the rest of the postdoc pool are. Not experts? That's not right. And this isn't just an academic thing. This is true outside of academia as well. When the pandemic hit, I did some work where I was the last author. I was still postdoc at the time. But because I was the last author, I got to do a lot of the media rounds that we had, which is very, very fortunate to do. And this is why the podcast started, actually. But it's remarkable that I felt like I shouldn't be doing that because I was just a postdoc. Academia or non-academia, everyone sees postdocs as being less than the PI for some reason, and it's incredibly disrespectful. It's not how things should be. And any good PI will tell you that a really good postdoc is worth doing everything you can to keep, because they don't just bring a huge amount of technical skills, they bring a lot of soft skills with them as well. Long-running labs, it's the postdocs and the technicians. They're the ones who keep the lab running. They're the ones they are the lab's knowledge, effectively. And when a long-running lab loses their postdocs and senior tech roles, when those people leave, labs can find it very, very difficult to start up again because the PI hasn't been doing lab work for a long time. That loss of expertise is a huge hit, and it's not an easy thing to get back in. Even when it comes to inviting people to give talks, it's the PI who gets the invited talk. Postdocs have to submit abstracts and, please sir, can I please give a talk at your conference? When really they should be invited directly. They should be the ones being invited to give the talks about the work because it's their work. Yes, the PI had the idea, they might have gotten the funding for it, and early on they might still be doing it. So early on there is a blurred line there, but for later stages, I don't really think PIs should be going around giving all these talks. Boring anyway if you listen to them because it's the same bloody talk over and over again. If you're in a year where you go to a conference, you can go to a few conferences and you see the same people giving the same talks, and then you'll be at your university and they'll be invited for a seminar and it'll be the same people giving the same boring talk that you've already heard. Get the postdocs out doing it. they benefit from the networking way more. It's more important for their career to do these things and to get out and network. And they did the work. They're the ones who are most excited about it. They deserve to be recognised and respected at that level as well. Long term, the PI are the ones who benefit more than anyone else from all the publications. So let them have that long-term benefit. The other thing is that, of course, there's big focus on papers. Most postdocs end up leaving academia, and papers don't matter much when you leave academia. It's great to show evidence that you can write, that you can complete projects, but the actual paper itself, where it's published, all that kind of stuff, completely irrelevant. And despite that, postdocs are the ones running themselves into the ground to get papers done within the 3-year limit of their grant. Because if they don't get that in 3 years of their grant, they're not going to get another postdoc, or they're going to really struggle to get another postdoc. So not only are they not actively rewarded or respected or recognised, there's this constant pressure to do more, to work long hours, to work weekends, and it just feels so worthless as a postdoc. That's how I felt as a postdoc doing it. The difference between postdoc and PhD with that, even though it might be in the UK, it's the same kind of timescales. With the PhD, there's no expectation to publish. You'll still get a postdoc whether you have or not. And so you can be calmer, you can go through it at a more measured pace, you can go off and do other things as well and learn other things. You don't just have to focus on what you're doing in the lab. Whereas at the postdoc stage, it feels like you've got to suddenly be very, very serious and you've got to get it done because now you're not going to get another job in a few years. And as soon as you do get your first job, you have to be thinking about the next job and when you're going to apply for it and what you need to be in a good position to get the next job. And it's a lot of pressure very, very quickly in the cycle. And this kind of pressure leads to a horrible work-life balance. Nobody listening to this really needs me to say much more, I don't think, because we're all well aware of how non-existent the work-life balance can be in academia. But if an employer values you, then they should want you to look after yourself and to take time away from work. This is something my PhD supervisor and my last postdoc supervisor did really well. They both would always tell me to take a break and to go on holiday and stuff. And that's what you should have. If your PI is good, they will tell you to take a holiday. But even if they don't care about you, if all they care about is your work output, they should still kind of want the same thing, because someone who doesn't work for themselves isn't going to do high quality work. But academia generally fails miserably at this point. And it does so by gaslighting us at the same time, because academia is all about being passionate. And we do things not because we want to get paid well, but because we're passionate about it. You can be passionate and also have a work-life balance. Remarkable as that might sound for academia. But I've been in those positions where I've been horribly overworked and I've witnessed a toxic culture of constant working. Even when I've been in the nice lab, I've seen it in apartments and around me. And I really struggle to understand where that pressure actually comes from, because no research outside of public health emergencies is that essential that it can justify the pressure. Academia moves quite slowly, so the career progression can't really justify that anyway. It's not like you're going from one amazing postdoc to running your lab. Most people will go through multiple rounds of being a postdoc before they get to that point. The only thing I can really think of that causes this kind of stuff is the short contracts, the temporary nature of what postdocing is, and that really messed up way in which we value or judge success. And it comes back down to publish or perish. But it is really important to have people tell you that you can be passionate, you can be really good at your job, but you can also have a life and still be successful. And you can do that in academia. So if you're looking around and you're seeing all that passion-driven work or passion-driven overwork, it's okay not to be in the lab 24/7, which somebody should have told me when I was starting out. I would have helped that, because I, as a master's student, was in the lab like 10 plus hours every day of the week. The other thing that I think sort of plays into all of this is that academia doesn't have the same kind of competitive environment that something like biotech or other careers generally have. A postdoc is a postdoc. Yes, you'll be more competitive for places with perceived greater significance, but ultimately it's the project you're kind of working on. And so there's not a sort of real, nobody's stealing a postdoc, as it were. Whereas in biotech, It's more about the benefits you're getting for the job you're in and the working environment you're in. And you can move a lot more freely across different companies. And I mean, that does a few things for you. One, it means the whole space is more competitive. And so people are much more concerned with offering things to people that they think will keep them there. But you can also jump across and move up the career ladder by sort of moving sideways, as it were. In academia, you can't do that. It's fixed. Doesn't matter where you are. It's based so much on, have you published in a big journal during your postdoc, and are you lucky enough that particular year to get the fellowship? And luck plays a huge part, and I think is far too often downplayed by those who are in PI roles who are giving all these same boring talks. A lot of people who write fellowships are probably good enough to do that work and to get that money. It's just the grant reviewers don't like it that year, or there are so many good ones to fund. It's the luck of the draw, which is why I really think grants and fellowships at a certain point, there should be a cut-off, and then everything after that really should just be a lottery. It would be a lot fairer. Obviously, every career has its own problems, but there is a big attraction there because for people I know who are in biotech, it is one of those things where you can go, you do the work, you feel more rewarded, and you can switch off. You can stop at the end of the day and go home, and you don't have to constantly think about it. Whereas academia, I don't know about everyone else, but I always struggle to switch off. I still think about research all the time. And that's exhausting. It's very mentally draining. Biotech represents a really good, strong challenge for academia. I think that is pulling a lot of postdocs away, but it's also pulling a lot of senior academics away. And so I think academia really needs to think a bit more like individual companies, as if they were competing for the people in a way they're not kind of currently doing. It's probably not explained very well, but I know what I mean. Ultimately, this is really not that difficult because postdocs want better environments and pay that matches their training, experience, and education required to do those roles. Entry-level postdoc positions pay terribly, and that is absolutely not acceptable. They should not pay so badly. They also want a quality of life that's comparable to those who didn't enter academia and spend 8+ years of their life just studying. Postdocs also want an environment of respect. That includes supporting us for our careers, whether that's in or out of academia. It includes appreciation for the efforts that we put in and for giving us space to work on our own ideas and our own things, or to teach or learn new skills. It's not just about the lab skills needed to do that project at that time. We want training beyond that. We want to learn beyond that. And we also want recognition for our work beyond the papers we produce. If you've got a postdoc who is making your lab environment an amazing place, that should be recognised, because that actually will have a bigger impact than to postdocs who are miserable, because a person who's making the lab environments better makes everyone more productive. So who is ultimately responsible for all of this? I don't think it's a single party that you can blame. The PIs are to blame, because if they're not behaving in the way they should, then they are at fault. The universities and institutions are to blame, because they're the ones who set pay scales. They're the ones who have a lot of responsibility in this space. The funders are also responsible, because they don't focus enough on the postdoc stage. I mean, as someone who's gotten into formal and professional disagreements with PIs, the institutions and the funders will always side with the PI. Always. Because the PI is the one who's bringing them the money in. The postdoc is expendable and replaceable. Which, those words alone are horribly wrong and they should not be something anyone should be able to say. Postdocs are also a bit of the problem because of the competition, but postdocs are never going to come together enough to stand up for each other. It's too precarious, there's too much competition, and there's too much siloing to do that. And that's based on my experience of trying to get postdocs to come together and work together. It's an enormous effort. Funders need to take a much more active role in combating the abuse and toxicity that exists in academia. That is ultimately their responsibility. And it's a responsibility that they have neglected for way too long. Universities are businesses. You can't rely on universities to do that. Funders have a huge amount of power in those positions because the funders remove the funding from abusive PIs the institutions will not step in and support them all of the time. So enough of them will be forced out. And these are people who are abusive because they won't find jobs outside of academia. Academia allows that abuse to happen. There's a lot of, they'll say words to the effect of, I would never get a job outside of academia. And it's a funny joke, but it's also very true. They are implicitly recognizing there that their behaviors, their approach to work is not professional and is something that any normal system would have rooted out a long time ago. But it's not just funders. University management can do so much more. And the two of them, university management funders, can come together to focus much more on that postdoc stage, to run events for postdocs. Some universities are doing this. I was at one last year giving a talk, and I say some universities are doing this. It's often the postdocs groups and societies who are doing this, but the universities are supporting it, which is good. When I was in Cambridge, I think it was the research development office, but also the careers office, they would run really, really good events for aimed at postdocs, but also for PhD students. And these would be based on a whole bunch of things. Cambridge did a really good one on careers. The problem is, when it's left to the universities to do this, they serve their group of people, their staff, brilliantly, if they do it well. But it's excluding anyone who's not at that university. So again, you're creating this inequality in the system when it shouldn't need to be there. The really big takeaway is that there's no shortage of brilliant people with brilliant ideas. And instead of looking at postdocs as being replaceable and transient, PI should be held to that same kind of level. Because there's so many brilliant people with brilliant ideas, all these leading experts and leaders of fellowships, right? Those PIs are replaceable. And none of them should be given a job for life. Your job should be contingent on your ability to do that job, to do it well. And being a PI, remember, is not about doing the science anymore. It's about building a good team. It's about getting money in and supporting that team, training your staff. If you can't do that job, you should not be a PI. If you can't train people, if you can't be responsible and look after the people in your lab, you should not be running a lab. But tenure and jobs for life protect people and allow this kind of abuse to continue on. The biggest problem I've always had with academia, and ultimately sort of why I left, is that despite all the problems that exist, systemic change is really unlikely. Problem is that there's really no excuse for not making your local environment better. This could be directly because a PI comes in and they're actually really good at running a nice lab and they make their lab great. Or you've got a good headed department who makes the whole department really great. There's no excuse for that not happening. And yet I saw that time, and I still hear stories and see it. Time and time again, that doesn't happen. And I hate seeing those kind of local failures. As long as we continue to allow luck to be the main driver of careers and success, we're not going to break free of the system we're in. I think people need to be willing to accept that change is needed and willing to listen and work together. And instead of attacking each other and these different groups and institutions attacking each other, if we could work together, we'd create a much better academia. We'd create a much better culture. And that would help retain brilliant postdocs who are leaving because they're not happy. It would retain the brilliant senior staff who are leaving because they're not happy. And they're often leaving for the same kind of reasons. We can and we should do better.
If you enjoyed listening, then hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to rate us on Spotify. Until next time, have a good week.